I'm Dane Rose, and I think there's something to explore in between the truth of betrayal and the truth of support, love, and, well, let's say support and love. So to begin this, we'll play a clip. It's from an old audio tape because the contract that Concept Synergy is currently demanding that all of Concept Synergy clients, and thus all of Lazaris friends, need to sign in order to gain access to the streaming material includes: we will never use Lazaris's name without written permission from Concept Synergy, which is one of the more extreme exercises of control and domination. I mean, who wants to have to write to Concept Synergy in order to mention what they were doing in their day with Lazaris? But Concept Synergy has trademarked the name of a friend. And so if I trademarked my name and sold material on the condition that you had to write to me before you could mention that you'd had a conversation with me, you know, who needs that kind of control? Who's that paranoid? Well, you know, Jach, Concept Synergy, their attorney, is that paranoid. And there's a juxtaposition between that level of fear, control, paranoia, and domination and what Lazaris is talking about in the tapes. And I think that while there's hardly an area of our culture that is not subjected or, you know, illustrative of that level of schizophrenia. I mean, you have the building departments of local governments constantly increasing the cost of legal housing, and then at the same time lamenting that we have homelessness and lamenting the fact that no one will build expensive homes required by law and then sell them at a discount and lose money. I mean, we have so many areas of schizophrenia. We have, you know, parents devoted to their children, so they say, except in the fact that they throw their kids under the bus so that they don't have to deal with this feeling or that thought. And, you know, we have our government, forcing all kinds of behavior, whether it's, thou shalt not explore personal consciousness with psychedelics, or for your own good, we will lock you up at taxpayer expense at $100,000 a year because we're worried about your health, And so you have these endless areas of schizophrenia, hypocrisy, and, this mix of generally starting out, I would think, with a certain amount of a good intention and ending up doing a tremendous amount of harm. The war on terror, who goes to war on an emotion? Emotionally illiterate cultures that will not spend a single formal hour of training in emotional literacy and at home, in kindergarten, middle school, and high school, in college, at work. The whole definition of being a professional in the American cult is to not bring your feelings into the job. And so you don't get an hour of emotional literacy at home kindergarten, middle school, high school, or college, and then you move into a domain where the very definition of success, so to speak, is, who's to be admired is the person who successfully suppresses and vacates all of their feelings during the majority of their lives, which is defined in the cult as one should, get a job and work. And so these areas of schizophrenia are in no way unique to Lazaris. Well, that's kind of the area that's somewhat negotiable, but they're no way unique to Jach and concept synergy and concept synergy attorneys and concept synergy staff. They're baked into the cult, and perhaps the area that's most disconcerting is noticing that after 4 decades of working with Lazaris, that concept synergy is more paranoid rather than less. And this also bakes itself, somewhat into the human potential, new age, spiritual arenas. For the simple fact that there seems to be a strong overlap between kind of the centers of kind of new thought and new ideas, and certain kinds of craziness. It's almost as if the underlying program of the cult doesn't change in these centers, organizations, etc., but rather a heightened level of insanity ensues in the discrepancy between talking about unconditional love or light or excellence, etc., and then doing the same things that the rest of the cult is doing, but then having to get a little bit more creative in justifying the underlying cult rhythm, of fear, of pain, leading to domination and control. All fear is fear of pain. All pain, let's use Lazaris's definition, separation from and longing for something that isn't there when there's pain, meaning I want this, but I'm here, the gap being pain. That pain is all around us. I don't think anyone enjoys the thought of one's tax dollars going to kill 1 million civilian Iraqis or give several million more PTSD, and yet that is what has occurred, and we're dealing with the fallout of that. I don't think anyone enjoys the thought of veterans committing suicide every 20 minutes, and 8% of our homeless being on the street. But that is what is happening day after day after day, and it has been happening concurrent with 40 years of working with Lazaris. And the fact that concept synergy employees appear to be underpaid. I know Bill Brown, who worked at concept synergy for, I think, close to 30 years. After 30 years of work at concept synergy, he was deposited with one of the relatives that he was initially encouraged to dissociate from. So in the early days of concept synergy, there were fantasies about, mass exodus. They would perhaps all commit suicide on a yacht and join Lazaris up in the sky, or wherever they would go, or that all kinds of wonderful things would be happening, and so you wouldn't want to connect with your parents and relatives who were obviously too unevolved to understand such things. But after decades of working with concept synergy, Bill Brown is making a $33,000 salary, less than he would be making at the post office where he was recruited from. And the old saying, going postal, the post office is not the place that many people would aspire to work. But that's Bill Brown's biggest regret, that he left the post office to join Concept Synergy. And the thing he's most annoyed about was he had a retirement fund, a retirement pension coming if he'd continued at the post office. But he threw his lot in with Concept Synergy because if one was to listen to Lazaris in the 70s and 80s and 90s, etc., I think to the extent that one believes Lazaris, one would think that life is, through proximity, through the law of resonance, association with Lazaris, and of course concept synergy versus just the post office, that life would be going up and certainly exceeding postal norms. If going postal is the synonym for shooting a bunch of people in existential despair, then it's not a very high bar to climb up to say, well, let's be part of a synergistic, organization. And Bill Brown's biggest regret is leaving the post office, losing his retirement account, his pension, which apparently in such abundant realms, where you're talking about the elegance of abundance and it's easier to succeed than to fail and all that. Apparently in concept synergy, it's not easy enough to succeed to actually pay your employees a retirement account. So, that's also Barbara Brannon and Terry Clancy's, now that they've been fired after decades of work, that's their biggest, it's like the indignity of giving so much and seeking to be part of this idea, only to find oneself at risk of homelessness, trying to scramble in retirement age to find something that, in some way gels with the identity, because as a concept synergy employee and as a Lazaris friend, you have a certain amount of identity, a pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being, which, if that's associated with Lazaris, doesn't include martyrhood and self-pity and all that. I mean, that was supposed to be the new thing, that you don't have to suffer in order to make a spiritual contribution, that you could just have fun because it's more fun to have fun than it is to suffer. And why not do that is, Lazaris's challenge and question. And so, certainly to discover that the people closest to Lazaris, Jack, Michael, Penny, and the staff, appear to have above average issues. I mean, certainly Jack and Penny and Michael have done very well with Lazaris, and have millions of dollars, and easily, of course, could have had millions more. And Lazaris has been clear that if you want to be very rich, you invest money. He has mentioned that on the money tape, and I don't think Warren Buffett would disagree. But with the tens and tens of millions coming in for essentially falling asleep, and lots of time to invest, and certainly dabbling in those areas, if we're to listen to the Lazaris and Penny tapes, apparently they had millions and plenty of interest and opportunity to invest and day trade and stuff. So how is it in all of that, with a monopoly market, that the Concept Synergy staff cannot be paid better than average, better than the post office? Like let's set a low bar. Could we treat our staff and pay them better than the post office? And if not, if 40 years of Lazaris and endless workshops and hundreds of thousands of dollars of crystals and the highest resonance to ever touch the planet isn't enough to get above the level of the post office, then what are the people involved suggested to do? Well, of course, Lazaris would say, recognize, acknowledge, forgive yourself, and change. For what? For trusting Jach Pursel, for taking a low-paying job at Concept Synergy, for believing the material. What are you forgiving, acknowledging for? Because, part of the shocker around this is this phenomena, and it's not unique to Concept Synergy. It is a pattern. It's a fractal pattern that is throughout many of these arenas. I mean, Jane Roberts died an early death as Seth's channel. I think 5% of Catholic priests are pedophiles. And that's kind of the study after all, the Catholic abuse, sexual abuse, etc. But I would guess that that's a low number. And it turns out that 12% of therapists acknowledge in an anonymous study, of course, 12% of therapists acknowledge having sexual relationships with some of their clients. And if you look a bit deeper at that, who are the 12%? Which clients do therapists have, sexually abusive relationships with? Because it never ends well for the client if a therapist has sex with a patient. It never ends well for the client, but also in many cases the client is paying the therapist to sexually abuse them, because the client, the therapist being narcissistic enough to say, well, even though I'm here to help the client, even though all the statistics are clear that it's not in my client's interest to have a sexual relationship with them as their therapist, even though I am the only person they could talk to about the abuse, and they're not going to want to trust another therapist after I abuse them and and certainly I shouldn't charge them any money. Many therapists go ahead and charge their clients to sexually abuse them, because the same narcissist that would ignore all the psychological data and say, screw it, who cares about the client? I'm horny and I'm in a power position, and so I'm going to have sex with my client. And the clients that both agree to this and that the therapists target are the most vulnerable, often confused and sexually abused clients in the past. They're the clients whose fathers, usually it's a male, told them this was because he loved them. So dad obviously loved them enough to have sex with them, when mom was not interested. And now their therapist loves them as well, another person trying to help. Only dad did it for free, and the therapist will tack a $200 an hour fee on the sex because obviously they're so unworthy. Who else would have sex with them? And so, these, whether it's the head people at Hare Krishna, or Osho, or the tremendous corruption, at the top of political power structures, whether it's the attacking of Bernie Sanders because he's actually more, upholding of, liberal ideals than the main DNC, or whether it's, Trump tearing to shreds almost any Republican value you could imagine, whether it's Christian values or whatever. And who cares, because it's our person, right? It's the name is more important than the experience, which is part of chauvinism. The symbol is important. I'm a Republican. Oh, good. Now that we've established that you have a name, go ahead and, lie and have affairs and spend money recklessly and cheat and don't pay your taxes and do all this stuff, because now we've established that you're one of us because of your name. Who cares who you are and what you do? Because we're concept synergy. And so who cares whether we control and lie and don't treat our employees well? Who cares whether we do all that we say we will for our customers, because we're concept synergy. Don't you understand? Concept synergy. That's why you have to sign an abuse contract, because it's not like those other abuse contracts by concept domination. See, we're not concept domination, but we want you to be dominated. But you see, it's concept synergy. And that's the difference. You get it? And in chauvinism, this makes perfect sense. It was the Human Awareness Institute that sued me because I published the information that their therapists were sexually abusing not only me, but other clients. And the Human Awareness Institute had to stop the public from becoming aware. Now, of course, domination and control, thankfully, in the United States has some limits, not a lot, but some, for free speech. And so they tried to sue to shut the information about human awareness down, but they failed because we have free speech. But not in the Lazaris community. If you want to talk about Lazaris, you have to write to concept synergy. Otherwise, you're out of integrity. With what? With our abuse contract that we demand. Sign this here and now, or you do not get access to Lazaris. Sign this here and now. Don't think about it. Don't consult your attorney. Don't see what... If you want to finish your meditation tonight, sign this now. That's the demand of anyone trying to stream and connect with their friend Lazaris. But this is Lazaris's take on that, and so that's where this is where the gap is, because none of that sounds very good. I don't think anyone's impression of therapists would go up after realizing that the most sexually predated clients are sexually predated by 12% of therapists. Those are the ones that admit it. Or by 5% of Catholic priests, which most likely refers to the other religions as well. I mean, I would doubt that Jehovah's Witnesses abused their people less than the Catholics, etc. So these are not these are not high numbers. And I think that most people, if they were asked to join Concept Synergy in the 70s or 80s, and they were told in advance, by the way, there is a price to publishing all of this abundance material and about grace and effortlessness and the New Age, and the price is this: you're not going to get a retirement fund, and you're going to get a lower than average salary, and you're not going to get overtime, and you're going to work. We're not going to train you as well as some companies might train you for things, but you will be asked to do a lot of stuff, and you're going to take more psychological pressure because you're a minority in a cult, in a culture that doesn't treat minorities well. You're a channeled freak, you're a this freak, you're a that freak. You're not normal. But you're not going to have the reserves financially to kind of combat that. Because in America, certainly if you have money in a cult that elevates money above human beings, you can stave off, you can be an eccentric rather than weird, basically. If you have enough money, you can be eccentric. And you're not weird anymore, you're just eccentric. But it does take a certain amount of money for you to get through that. That's just something to judge. And there's also a bit of schizophrenia because outside the Lazaris cult, the people that don't believe in channels and all of that, outside of that thing, you're viewed with suspicion and fear, so your rank goes down. But inside, if you're at Concept Synergy, inside the Lazaris cult, you're at the top of the rank because Lazaris has, you've got high rank. So there's this schizophrenia where you're at the bottom of, you may even be devilish, if you're dealing with Christians or something. So you're at the bottom and you're at the top at the same time, and it's somewhat schizophrenic. And it's a hard thing to process, which is it? What's going on? Am I the worst thing? Am I a financial loser, or am I highly spiritually evolved? It's a question that anyone involved with Concept Synergy needs to deal with, that if you're not involved with Concept Synergy, if you're working for Google or Facebook isn't very popular these days because of all the data and machinations and all of that. But if you work for for certain reputable companies that Tesla or something like that, that are viewed relatively universally as leaders, then you don't have to deal with why are you there? Please, we got to get you out, an intervention, and all this dynamic. So you're going to have some stuff around that, and I think the biggest exposure that a Concept Synergy employee doesn't fully understand is that if they are harmed by Jach Pursel, by Penny, by Concept Synergy as a whole, or by Lazaris, if they are harmed psychologically or financially and otherwise, that no one is going to understand what that feels like. It's a certain form of predictable isolation or loneliness. No one's going to understand what that feels like. And the reason no one's going to understand what that feels like is because they weren't involved in a cult for 30 years where the mantra was putting spirituality as your highest priority, not money, not retirement, your spirituality is your highest priority. And that Lazaris was your main tether or your main contact point to spirituality. And that Lazaris was the highest resonance to ever touch the planet, according to Lazaris. And the more time you spend with Lazaris, the more it reinforces the belief. If you listen to Lazaris, 20 years ago, whatever, and he says, we're the highest resonance to ever touch the planet, and you say, yeah, I'm not into that. See you later. That doesn't have a lot of impact. But if you spend $100,000 on crystals that have been marked up 1,000% because Lazaris suggested that crystals were at the dew line of human consciousness and, would presumably help you a lot more than investing in retirement, because retirement wasn't at the dew line of human consciousness, crystals were. And if you invested in, whatever, tens of thousands in seminars and spent a considerable amount of your time on the tape, every single time that you've spent a moment of time, money, or natural resources invested in the relationship with concept synergy and Lazaris, you have told yourself that you believe what you're doing and what Lazaris has said. Because it's too crazy making to say, I could go to the Bahamas, I could buy a new car, I could invest in, this or that stock, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to invest that money in a high-priced crystal or whatever. To do that, the only way that makes sense is if you believe what Lazaris is saying. If you don't believe it, you don't do it. We always strengthen our beliefs with our investments of time, money, and natural resources. And we invest based on our belief. So it's a loop. We strengthen the belief by investing. We invest based on the belief. And a lot of investments have been made and strengthened in their belief in Lazaris. And one of the most important, I would say, the foundational beliefs around Lazaris is that Lazaris is our friend and loves us. Now, why is that so attractive and such a natural foundation? Well, every human being has an innate need for love and belonging, number one. And number two, in the American cult, you can go cradle to grave without a single person telling you they love you, they won't abandon you, they really care about you. Many parents, particularly the father, etc., an older generation, will not say that. Love is a dirty word in some areas of dating. Let's keep it casual, etc. You say you love, I'm out of here. Certainly anyone trying to sell you a program, Tony Robbins is filled with love for every member of his audience and all that. And so there's a deep hunger to hear the words, I love you. But what does it mean? What does it mean to love someone? And Lazaris has done a better job than most in describing how to enact in order to provide pleasure and security and this and that. So the question is, how much pleasure and security does Bill Brown feel when, having been encouraged to dissociate from his family for decades and getting below the post office salary, he's then, once he gets sick with Huntington's disease, who's called up to take Bill Brown out of the realm of concept synergy so that they don't have to deal with even the impact of their shaming and craziness, which may well participate in the disease. After all, if you're listening to tapes about abundance and love and this and that and the other, and you're being treated worse than you were at the post office, it might create a little bit of craziness. There might be a little bit of schizophrenia has to develop to partition those two worlds of tapes and reality in the brain. But Bill Brown's sister is called, and off he goes without a pension or without medical disabilities and various things like that from concept synergy. And off Terry Clancy goes, not sure what he can do at his age. He doesn't feel a lot of pleasure about being fired. He doesn't feel a lot of security. He doesn't feel loved by Jach, by Lazaris. And Barbara Brannon doesn't feel good about being fired because she was trying to advocate for concept synergy, actually giving a retirement. First, it took a while for concept synergy to give medical. If we're going to pay you poorly and subject you to higher stresses culturally and internally, because Penny wasn't very easy to work with. So we're going to subject you to higher stresses culturally, where you'll be freakified to some extent, and then internally, culturally, where you'll be deified. All of these are stresses. It is not healthy to be put on a pedestal, and it is not healthy to be demonized. A concept synergy employee will experience both. It's not healthy to have secrets. What do? I work at a channeling organization. Everyone's going to have an opinion about that. And those opinions do not help the employees. They don't help Jach either. But Jach is, getting the millions. Jach will be viewed as a winner in this dynamic by the cult, not because he was kind to employees or this or that, but because he has money in a cult that values money above human beings. So Jach has some protection by the cult's buy-in to elevating money. The staff do not, because I have yet to meet an abundant concept synergy employee that has anything like the access to resources that many of the wealthy clients who didn't get, for the most part, their money listening to Lazaris and becoming wealthy. Rather, it's wealthy clients that are interested in this type of material and are willing to drop a few $100,000 in the relationship. And, it doesn't, in some cases, it is a huge thing. I think the largest price I had ever spent on anything, not a car, not a truck, nothing, was a $20,000 crystal at Concept Synergy. And I had debts. And, I could have used a new truck around that time, for my business. But I was, drawn to what seemed like the way to grow or what seemed like the best way to become more in a good and healthy way. And what better way to do that than to spend time with the highest resonance to ever touch the planet, and do these techniques that worked and all of that. So I think there's a range, of things. I'm sure there are people that, started out with relatively little, just like there are in the larger culture. I mean, obviously we wouldn't have millions of millionaires around the world if nobody was starting with less and getting more. The question is, does that correlate in some way with, a Lazaris relationship? Because that correlation, it's not clear to me. Let's say that I have 100 data points, meaning knowing around 100 people in the community and following that over a 20-year period. It's not clear to me that someone inside the Lazaris community dropping a few 100,000 into the Lazaris relationship has a higher statistical odd of either doing worse, because rather than investing in retirement and IRAs and stuff, they bought crystals and stuff. I do know there's a tremendous amount of frustration about that, because whether I've talked with former Concept Synergy employees who are furious that they spent all this money on crystals and don't have enough for retirement in their 60s and 70s, or clients who feel the same way, because when Concept Synergy marks up a crystal 1,000%, which was, whether it's the current markup at the moment, was the markup for some years, there's no way you're going to sell that crystal and transfer that into into a retirement or medical bills or something like that. But of course, many Lazaris people weren't expecting to need medical bills in their 70s or 80s, but they are. If I peek into the medical state of Concept Synergy, past employees or present employees, or the general public or the clients, they are needing medical bills just like the rest of the population. Homeopathy, in the health tape that Lazaris talks about being, energy healing and homeopathy being up at the top. I've spent over $100,000 on energy healings, and I am in worse health physically than I was 10 years ago before spending $100,000 on energy healings by multiple practitioners, including Lazaris friends, and non-Lazaris friends. So it's not, and I've done homeopathy, and it doesn't necessarily deal with, with whether it's depression or grief or loneliness or trauma or betrayal and abandonment. These things are, obviously $140,000 of therapies have not sorted that out, and whether it's a history of working with Lazaris or having $80,000 of Concept Synergy crystals in my house, those are not turning out to necessarily be the key things on whether or not my well-being is going up and going down. But as someone who's also, done crystal business very marginally, in my landscape work, and, gotten familiar with the market, I am certainly aware that if I sell any Concept Synergy crystals, I will do so at a 1/3 of the price paid. If that, that would be, crystals are not the most liquid commodity, to sell. And that's in general, even before high prices tacked on by concept synergy. So there are synergies, dark and light, around this. You could say that concept synergy was a synergy that that the Lazaris events were bigger than the sum of the part of Bill Brown packaging up the tapes and Penny going around telling people, what to do, and various staff manning the phones and booking this. You could say there's a synergy, like any company. Any company at all is a synergy where the product is hopefully could be considered greater than the sum of the parts. But it's also a dark synergy where there's more invisibility because the people outside the concept synergy cult do not understand the lonelinesses and even the vocabulary inside the cult. And the client base doesn't understand the shame and the abuse of dealing with Penny and Jach. And so there's two forms of invisibility. You have invisibility on outside the cult, and you have invisibility inside the cult. And Concept Synergy and Jach are working very hard, and that's in many ways the main impetus for this rebellion of the control, which ironically Lazaris is always talking about. Live your own rules, etc. And the healthy rebellion in search of greater freedom, while Concept Synergy is ramming down, an abuse contract that is tighter and more bizarre in some ways than even Apple's abuse contract. I mean, this is not unique to Concept Synergy. We are in a cult of abuse contracts. We each get an abuse contract with our parents. Then we get abuse contracts, with school, and we get an abuse contract with work. Do this, this, and this. And each one, the relationship is not entirely healthy, but it's take it or leave it. And Lazaris talked, in Healing Shame, etc., about breaking these contracts. But in order to listen to the tape on breaking to the contract, for those that no longer have the tapes and are streaming, you have to sign a new abuse contract with Concept Synergy. And that fear and that control and that domination and betrayal of the trust placed in Concept Synergy, like all rebellious factions in cult history, religiously or otherwise, that, it's an interesting circle where the group gets tighter in its down movement, of control, and then the rebels rebel more because there's more to rebel again. This is why the United States lost the war in Vietnam and the war in Afghanistan and Iraq. What I mean by lost is the United States spent trillions of dollars of public money tormenting, traumatizing, causing PTSD in millions of human beings in these countries on the basis of lies. And one of the soldiers I watched talking about Vietnam explained the process. He said, we would go into these villages and we would bomb women and children, uncles, grandparents. We would terrorize human beings. And he said, we would never kill them all. But by the time that we left, There would have been a few insurgents, a few military people that we killed in the midst of all those civilians. He said, however, by the time that we left, the civilians that remained after the brutality of the U.S. terrorism on another sovereign country, they would all join the enemy ranks, because every one of them knew, after seeing the terror and horror of the U.S. presence, that they were the single biggest threat to Vietnam and their well-being, and needed to be evacuated and destroyed because of their domination, because of their cruelty, because of their inhumanity. And so he said, every village we visited, we recruited more Viet Cong than we killed. We recruited for the Viet Cong by being inhumane and cruel. Now, the exact same thing goes on with drone warfare in apartment complexes in which 97% of the casualties are civilian. Those are all recruits for people who want their own power back. And so, whether it's Iraq, or whether it's Vietnam, or whether it's Afghanistan, the United States military agenda has generated 10 times more money and 10 times more recruits going to extremist groups that promise to protect against the dominator, against the terrorist, because the biggest weapon of mass destruction in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Vietnam was the United States' presence of military domination. And so the dynamic grew. Now, Lazaris has talked about domination and Hitler and, those who try to control and dominate ultimately end up dominated by the very things they try and control. And obviously the U.S. military and the U.S. people have not learned that in mass, or we wouldn't have spent more than $10 trillion of our children's money building the terrorist network for our children to deal with through U.S. military policy. And we would not have created drug addiction by creating a war on drugs, which is really a war on human beings. We wouldn't have created a war on human beings and separated so many children from their fathers if we understood that for every family we destroy, rescuing people from powders, for every human family we destroy, we create massive trauma in a traumatically illiterate cult that then leads to addiction and compulsion in the next generation and the present generation, which creates a demand for pain-numbing drugs. So for every family we split up to take one drug person off the street, the stress in the economy from imprisoning 1 to 2% of our population at $100,000 to $200,000 a year, plus the expense of another $200,000 in prosecuting them. Spending $300,000 to $1 million for 1 to 2% of the population to break up their families, reduce the tax base, and also create massive trauma in that family and shame, means that those people in a psychologically illiterate culture where they don't receive a single ounce of support but receive active programming around chauvinism, these people are going to look to what? Drugs, to get themselves out of it. And so you kill or imprison one person associated with drugs at the same time you generate so much pain, you elevate the demand for drugs 300%. And then when the US CIA gets involved with flooding black neighborhoods with crack in order to raise money to send to guerrilla terrorist organizations in other countries to protect our policies, well, that's how we create an epidemic of addiction, pain, and destroy our environment and our economy. These are the lessons of our cult for any of us willing to understand them. And these videos would not be occurring were it not for Concept Synergy's efforts to conduct a war on free speech by its members. The very acts that come out of fear, paranoia, and domination don't feel good to people who have been sold on the idea of Lazaris being a paid friend that will always love them, that will never betray them, that is working for them. These things don't feel good. So when this doesn't feel good and that gets pushed into the forefront, videos like this occur. Now, in the cycle of escalation with, a dominance hierarchy, you see a militarization, right? You have to form, you're with us or against us, you're this and all of that. But it is interesting that Concept Synergy's response to protests by Barbara Brannon, etc., and the agreement came after my first video because Jach wouldn't talk. When I was in enormous pain trying to deal with this schizophrenia, created, in this, dynamic, whether it's, being traumatized by a Lazaris friend more than a non-Lazaris friend in romantic relationships or various things, this doesn't fit nicely, that it doesn't fit well that it's Concept Synergy that pays you less than the post office while selling tapes on abundance. It doesn't fit well that the service at Concept Synergy is lower than at Safeway while they sell a tape on excellence. It doesn't fit. And when the response to not fitting is fear, domination, and control, that doesn't fit in the tape on domination. But it also doesn't fit when Lazaris says that their techniques work and that the law of resonance means that when two resonances are together, the lower will go to the higher, the lower will go to the higher will go to the lower, or they'll both meet in the middle. When Lazaris says we're the highest resonance that ever will be, and we're not moving, the assumption that a rational person who believes Lazaris might make is that Jach will go up towards Lazaris, Penny will go up towards Lazaris, not die of chronic illness at an early age with, vodka and overdose of painkillers. That's not going up in our sense of the word. And you mean your salary goes down if you get near Lazaris, and you die at a young age, and there's more insanity at work. And you pay much more for crystals from your friend because they believe in the elegance of abundance when it comes to Jach and marking things up 1,000% for spiritual reasons. But they don't pay their employees 10 times You see, that's where it completes the circle. We charge our customers 10 times more, but we don't pay our employees 10 times more. Why not? That would be a great story. I don't think anyone would be bitching about that, and nor would past Concept Synergy employees be griping and fuming with their NDAs. You know, that's a great thing, freedom and power and expression, and then you can't talk about your relationship with Concept Synergy or Lazaris with your NDA, because you had the audacity to believe Lazaris that to get near them would raise your resonance. Now you're stuck with a high resonance and an inability to talk, and you feel kicked out, lost. Well, this is not new. This has been going on with crappy religions and stuff for thousands of years. You know, Lazaris pointed out that the Christians rebelled against some other religion that wasn't treating them very well. That this is basically how any movement gets started. People get pissed off, you know, with the Romans or this, that, and the other. They start their own thing. And so that's what this is in a certain, you know, in a certain sense. I'm pissed off that Jach won't deal with anyone and his impact or Lazaris's impact. I'm pissed off about that. He has no time for intimate friendships is his statement about this as the company owner who sells all of this. And I'm pissed off at the poor treatment of employees. Why? Because I understand what I went through in starting as an abused adolescent dealing with, you know, various things. I understand that. But I also understand that what I went through would have been more if I had worked at Concept Synergy. And I also understand that it would have been more painful if I didn't have any money. Now, I didn't work for Concept Synergy, so I have money. So it's not as painful that I spent a lot of it, you know, on crystals and stuff like that, because I'm not thinking, gosh, I can't pay the next medical bill because I bought, you know, this crystals or whatever. Some Concept Synergy people are former staff members and clients are in that predicament. So that's the backdrop of this. And let's have a listen to what Lazaris says in Letting in Lazaris's Love. This is week number 4, where Lazaris talks about, you know, how to let in more of his love. Because remember, the foundation of the whole relationship of friendship with Lazaris, which is actually a paid escort relationship in some respects, because Lazaris will not be your friend unless you pay the monopoly distributor Concept Synergy a certain amount of money for that friendship. Well, that's what we call prostitutes or escorts or consultants or whatever. But this is a friendship. It's a paid friendship. So I bought this tape in my teens, and I'm now reverting to it because Concept Synergy is refusing to give me access to streaming unless I promise never to tell anyone anything about Lazaris without their written consent, which I don't need another abuse contract. I've got plenty. You know, thank you, but no. And it's also the case that, you know, whenever absurd things, you know, escalate. I mean, this is absurd. I was doing an evening meditation and I wanted to click play and I get this long abuse contract. Sign this or you can't access your subscription. That's it. Well, what about the people who don't have tapes from their teens, who haven't bought the material 3 times, which is Concept Synergy's protocol? You buy it as a tape, then you buy it as a CD, then you buy it as a streaming Unlike Amazon, there's no discount for your friendship because, in Amazon, if you buy Kindle and Audible and the book, they'll give you a discount. In Concept Synergy, you buy the book, the tape, the CD, and the streaming. Why? Because we're a monopoly. Peter Thiel would love investing in them because he thinks, competition is for losers. And certainly you can, treat your staff and your customers more poorly. Governments do this all the time because they're a monopoly for a needed service, the highest priority of your life. So these are contextual ideas. Now, no idea is true. No belief is true. It's a way of getting into an arena to see certain things. And if what you see is useful and you use it to elevate your well-being, that's an intelligent use of the technology of language. It's not true. We're not dealing with reality. We're dealing with models of reality. And that's what makes it tricky, but it's also what leads to the sense of betrayal. Because when one person's definition of love has nothing to do with another person's definition of love, often they feel betrayed without understanding that they didn't take the time to delineate the definitions. Now, let's play a little bit of this clip here because we have these data points and then we have Lazaris's words here. And every person is going to hear these having a different impact, in part based on what they mean. But of course, betrayal isn't spelled out in any of the tapes by Lazaris. Usury, shame and various things are spelled out, but anyway, let's have a look.
We will never forsake you. We will never abandon you.
So, we will never forsake you, we will never abandon you. So, to that, one question is, why hasn't Lazaris piped up about this abuse contract with Concept Synergy? Because to people who don't want to sign the contract, with Lazaris choosing Jach, distributing in a monopoly format, because Lazaris, hey, if Lazaris sent me an email in meditation or whatever and said, hey, Dane, I'd like to channel through you because I don't like the monopoly dynamics at Concept Synergy, I would say, okay, when could we do it? Okay, I've got this hours. You could channel with me within these hours. Let's negotiate a win-win, dynamic here. And if my win-win dynamic wasn't a good fit for Lazaris, he could go to a million other people, many of whom would jump at the chance to channel Lazaris. He could say, how about it? And he could then transfer the material out of the stranglehold of Concept Synergy, their fear and control and paranoia. Lazaris could do that in a moment. But Lazaris is forsaking and abandoning Terry Clancy, Barbara Brannon, Bill Brown. They're not getting an explanation about his silence or their silence about low wages, having to fight for medical, then not getting retirement, and dealing with extra stresses psychologically, both working in Concept Synergy, the discrepancy. It's always hard when half the people think you're amazing and half the people think you're terrible. I've dealt with that a lot in life. Like, is this the person who thinks I'm amazing, or is this the person who thinks I'm terrible? It's like, it's hard to prepare, when you're in that dynamic. People who work at Concept Synergy, they're on a pedestal in general to people who like Lazaris. They're also get all the anger and resentment for when Lazaris's techniques don't work. They're dealing with that. So it's not an easy job. You could say working at Concept Synergy is martyrhood, because you get lower than average salary, no benefits, but higher than average stresses. And you'll never be able to talk about it and get support for that dynamic, because Jach will make sure that his need for secrecy is more important than your need to be seen and be heard, because, well, that's what chauvinism is all about. My need is more important than yours. I know Terry feels outraged and can't listen to Lazaris. Bill Brown, isn't liking this. I think Mary Beth is dying of cancer. I won't talk. That's just an impression, so that I won't put much weight on that. That's an impression of mine, without looking into it. But is this a way to treat spiritual family and friends? And if not, why are the people closest to Lazaris doing that to themselves and each other? Because that gets to the thing. If the people closest to the highest resonance to ever touch the planet are punishing themselves and others more than average, or average, then there's a betrayal of the promise that, did all those meditations and efforts and thousands of journal pages and stuff mean nothing? It just means that you're average? Yeah. Plenty of Americans disillusioned, chronic fatigue, depressed, unhappy. 20%, in fact, of Americans are dealing with depression, and more people commit suicide than die in car accidents. And we're creating a homeless epidemic, and that's average. But Barbara Brannon almost ended up on the street. Terry Clancy isn't sure that he can make it his obligations financially at his age and what he's going to transition into. Bill Brown was rescued by the family who Concept Synergy encouraged him to dissociate from. So Bill Brown was given, because Concept Synergy is so cheap, that, after inducing mental illness in a 30-year employ at Concept Synergy, they said to the relatives they'd told Bill to distance himself from, to go deal with it. Here's your relative back now that he's sick from working with us for 30 years. We don't want to deal with him. And so she has to then pay to keep her brother alive, because family ties in the sick conventional family apparently matter more than spiritual family ties. Well, Lazaris has said he has access to every subconscious brain on the planet, including mine and yours and Bill Brown's and Terry's. What is abandonment? What is betrayal? What is love? Because depending on how you define that and why, this is true, partially true, or completely wrong. And each of us has to decide that largely alone, because this kind of dialogue, like this could be a fun discussion with Lazaris, meaning Lazaris could talk about all this in a back and forth, generate lots of interest, because the majority of people who have ever worked with Lazaris are not working with Lazaris. Now, my impression is that it's about 95%, that 95% or more of the people who have ever listened to a tape, gone to a workshop, done a reading, whatever, are not working with Lazaris today as at all or as a primary kind of or a main, part of their life. But people are getting the latest cell phone every week or every year or whatever when they upgrade their cell phone. Now, if Lazaris' techniques work and cell phones work, the same people who are walking away from Lazaris are spending money on cell phones that work. I believe that if 33-second techniques and myths of manifestation and programming and processing and shame work and all of that worked as well as cell phones, that people would rather do a Lazaris workshop than get a new cell phone. Hey, this cell phone is working, but I can end pain, I can conquer fear, I can end guilt. I've just never met the Lazaris friend who has ended guilt, ended pain, ended fear, ended this, etc. I haven't ended any of that. I'm lonely, guilty, shame-based, frightened. What else? Dealing with scarcity. dealing with shame and shame contracts, including with concept synergy. Sorting out the dance with self and ego, and struggling, right? So I'm trying to piece together all the various things that and dealing with childhood wounds and adolescent wounds, and sorting out how to create love in my life, and failing in large in large part. I don't think after more than 30 years of relating with Lazaris very closely or not, that I'm very close to where I'd hoped to be when I began. Now that's on the Lazaris front. On the financial front, I have more money than I thought I would have or need. I've achieved thousands of goals, but I've never used the Lazaris materials kind of specifically for that. I've used, Brian Tracy has a good goal setting thing, and Dale Carnegie has a great effective public speaking, thing and teaching thing, and Brian Tracy does good selling, for excellence and this, and there's a lot of terrific, and Tim Ferriss helps with time management and virtual assistants and, things like that. And so what partly disturbs me about that is that I know other Lazaris friends who have the same kind of heaviness and sense of failure or shame around not having a great, abundant life inside, because that's, I think the area that one would most, hope that Lazaris would help to heal, etc. Though there isn't a lot of scientific study, I don't think, on how, they've shown that porn addiction and porn sex is actually counterproductive to physical intimacy. So if you spend too much time watching porn, you may not be as good in bed, basically. There may be another correlation that if you have too many of your friendships on cassette tape or on internet, that you're not as good of a social person. Now, I will say that Lazaris friends are in areas much more difficult to deal with than the average person. I say never. I can just think of, whether it's former staff members or present staff members at Lazaris or Jach, or various people that I've worked with professionally where I've been the service provider or I've hired Lazaris friends. There are plenty of things that I've dealt with Lazaris friends that I don't normally deal with in business and in relationship. So, this is an important data set. It would be wonderful for Concept Synergy to actually gather and publish a study, on the impact of Lazaris, positive and negative, because it'd be free, right? And wouldn't it be fun to know what 40 years of Lazaris has done to, tens of thousands of people, both constructively and negatively? Now, the people that I meet that have, I meet people and, I mention Lazaris and they say, oh, I listened to that in the 80s, or I did this and whatever, and they're off and not working with Lazaris, anymore. I don't sense a tremendous amount of animosity. The greatest animosity towards Lazaris that I've ever experienced is former Concept Synergy staff. Maybe he's not Lazaris anymore. What if he's, it's changed, the message isn't the same. So the people that are in the most pain in their relationship with Lazaris are, Penny, who's dead, Michael, who's dead, and former and perhaps current Concept Synergy staff. Now, that's not a good correlation of you rise to resonance, the highest resonance is, the more you rise to that. That's not a good data set. You want to see people getting happier and more abundant and more free and loving Lazaris more that are closer to Lazaris. I don't know what Penny's last thoughts about Lazaris were, etc. But I do know that in romantic relationships, what people fall in love with is the self that they become in relationship to the other. Like, if I choose to spend more time with a woman, it's because I like who I'm becoming around her. And I think, I like this me. Thank you for being the gardener. Thank you for, you're watering this part and you're not watering this part. And I'm becoming someone I enjoy around you. And the most important thing is, if I want to care for someone, is the flip. Do you like who you are around me? Are you becoming more of who you want to be around me than if you're alone or with someone else? Because if not, then please go and spend time with the person who helps you become who you want to be. So let's listen a little bit more to Lazaris.
We love you forever, forever and a day.
Now, I want to bifurcate here. This is why I said there's, two parts here. I love hearing, what Lazaris is saying here. I feel good hearing these things. And number one. Number two, I'm not hearing them anywhere else in my entire life. My wife isn't saying, I'm going to love you forever and a day. You're not saying it. My parents aren't saying it. My siblings aren't saying it. It's a mixed blessing that we're not speaking. Nobody's saying that. My government isn't saying that. Lazaris is saying this, and this is why I think the foundation of of every human's need to experience love and belonging, and Lazaris's profession of eternal love with the more, if you believe Lazaris, then it's a more believable thing, because if someone says they're their soulmate and then they go into the other life and say, oh, I changed my mind, right? I didn't see you clearly in that lifetime, but as someone outside of the set, you'd like to be able to, think Lazaris, who doesn't have any time, would not change his mind. So that's on the one hand. On the other hand, I and former concept synergy staff, etc., are not feeling loved by Lazaris today in certain ways. And so for what isn't happening today to be eternal for a day, well, if that's not saying a lot. It's like saying, I won't pay you forever and a day. I'm not paying you today, so whatever I'm doing today, I won't pay. Will be for all time. So, little devil's advocate counter around that. But the other thing is, Lazaris has no time, of course, and so Lazaris is saying forever and a day. In a timeless reality, there's only now. So that's some counter back and forth here.
As long as there is light.
There's also, in part of, as long as there is light, if you take the one, you split it in two, you've got polarity. Before the split, before language, you have the interconnected ecology. You have all that is in an undivided whole. And it is the division, the descent into the knowledge of good and evil, the polarity, the black and white, the masculine and feminine. It's the descent into polarity that creates human consciousness, distinction, language. But it also creates division and separation. And I do find it, particularly in more of the work I've been doing recently about transcending polarity. What's wrong with the darkness? They are part one of the other. I think that's cultural, meaning I think that because we're a chauvinistic cult, we've elevated men, tall, bigger, up, light, and de-elevated feminine, female, small, dark, down. But a chauvinistic cult can split a circle, asymmetrically and say it's like that. But every single polarity, if the cut is true, is right in the middle, which means that light and darkness are equal, that up and down are equal, that hot and cold are equal, that masculine and feminine are equal, that men and women are equal. They're equal, number one. Number two, they don't exist without the other. There's no females to give birth to males, and there's no males to inseminate females. There's no people. If there's no light to contrast with darkness, there's no light or darkness. And so I do notice that Lazaris is emphasizing in a variety of ways, like all the dominant religions and most of the dominant power structures that were in recent time are male. And Lazaris chose to channel through a male, a white male, an American white male. He could have channeled through the Chinese. He could have channeled through one man and one woman. And Lazaris is emphasizing the light. Now, Lazaris has also said that spiritual teachers are political as well as truthful. Well, Lazaris says he's a friend, but asks for payment for that friendship. He says he's not a teacher, but he does almost nothing but teach. Lazaris doesn't ask the audience, what do you think about this? And, gee, well, you're right. Let's evolve our ideas. No, Lazaris is constantly instructing and teaching, including the instruction that he's not a teacher. The light bit, rather than as long as there's light, well, there will be light as long as there's darkness. There's contrast, so you could just as well say the other. But I think that's political, meaning we're in a cult that fears the dark, and so if Lazaris said, as long as there is darkness, we will love you, we'd probably, in our ignorance, do something ridiculous with that. In fact, the scientific truth is they are equal, as Elon Musk pointed out. Why fear the dark when the dark is just an absence of photons? That's how he got over the fear of the dark.
We shall love you as long as there is light.
So here I'll mention my own definition of love, because on the one hand, it reveals a great scarcity of love in human dimensions. On the other hand, it's a useful map. If you want to love yourself or love someone, it may not be very easy to follow the steps because they're unfamiliar and awkward, and they go counter to many aspects of the cult. But I don't think you end up with betrayed, bitter, angry past employees, etc., the way concept synergy is. So love is loving enough to care, caring enough to take time, taking enough time to see, seeing enough to understand, understanding enough to empathize, empathizing enough to attune, and attuning enough to succeed at facilitating one's human needs, survival, at facilitating the survival of oneself, survival, security of survival, love and belonging, self-esteem, the development of one's gifts, bringing those gifts powerfully into the world, abundantly into the world, generating abundance by disseminating the value of the gift, and then becoming part of something bigger than oneself. So if one loves oneself, takes enough, well, if one cares enough to take the time to see enough to understand, to empathize with ourselves, to empathize enough to change. I mean, Josh, I really see how those cigarettes are ruining your life. I empathize. Do you empathize enough to stop smoking? Or you just empathize without doing anything? Like, it's really hard being poor. Well, do you empathize enough to study and get a raise? Or do you just empathize enough to feel pity? Empathizing enough to attune, to change, and changing enough and keep changing enough to succeed at facilitating, survival, security, love and belonging for oneself, self-esteem, knowing what our gifts are and developing them, bringing them abundantly into the world, creating abundance, and then becoming part of something bigger than ourselves. If we love ourselves, following that map, first of all, I like the map. I find it far more useful than anything Lazaris has said about love. The Lazaris friend that I first dated for 20 years did very little of that for herself, and me. And the Lazaris material was more of a sticking point, like, you're not creating your reality good enough, you're not doing, than it was, leading to that kind of love. And so, that's my sense of love. Now, does Lazaris love enough to care? Well, he says he does. Does he care enough to take time? Well, the taking time is more for if someone is timeless and sees everything in all space, that's for me. Lazaris has dialogued with me for, I think, 30 minutes in one reading. But there wasn't taking enough time to see and help me see what it was. It was over and I felt nervous. I felt nervous every time I've been in a share with Lazaris in the dialogue. It takes time, quality time. That's my love language, to know and be known. I don't know what Lazaris means by this because it's a monologue, not a dialogue. Do you care enough to take time? Do you take enough time to see? That's where it immediately breaks down. I don't see why Lazaris isn't saying something to advocate for Terry Clancy, for Barbara Brannon. I don't see why Lazaris doesn't think that's worth saying something about. Taking enough time to see, seeing enough to understand, understanding enough to empathize, empathizing enough to attune, to make adjustments, to maybe hold a workshop on what synergy means, what excellent service means, or recommend some of the books that that lead to that. Is that what Lazaris means about love? And if not, is that as useful as human love? And if it's not as useful as human love by a competent mentor and teacher and person who cares about you, if it's not as useful as a good CEO of a company, then is it good to say that this is the highest resonance in love that will ever touch the planet, rather than this is a form of love that may not be very useful to you? Why don't you get a good CEO? Those are the things that you need to attune and discuss and understand. It takes time. And it takes dialogue, not monologue. But Lazaris is offering monologue, not dialogue.
We will never forsake you.
So there again, Lazaris will never forsake us. If there's no time and he is not forsaking us now, then that would seem true. How does Terry Clancy feel that he didn't get a retirement and is worried about finances and is in his 50s or 60s, and I think he's in his 60s, and it's not an easy time to go from being AV guy on a channeled entity to what? Maybe he could join the post office and take up where Bill Brown left off. But he can't get a pension, at this rate. The longevity tapes have not stopped Jach or anyone associated with Lazaris from aging. And the immortality paradigm is, basically frightening if you don't have a pension. In some ways. So these are two different worlds. Now, I love the fact that I can feel great and feel a vibe, etc., and see an area where this is true. But I can also see an area where this doesn't seem true at all. And this area gets louder the more pain I'm in, and this area gets louder the more successful I am at usually running other parts of my life. Like if I'm doing very well with a happy client and am creating loving moments with people in my life and my dog and the weather's beautiful and all of that, then I'm in less pain. I'm in a lot of pain, but I'm in less pain, and then this is more visible. So, that's I hope that this dialogue, you could call it between the self and the ego, both are an important part of the psyche. You could call it between the sympathy of the child, the antipathy of the adolescent, and the adult that needs to wake up to this. And the adult has to piece these two things together, to grieve the losses, to process the anger, to feel the hopelessness, to question, to dream, to look at changes. That the adult has to synthesize this in a way that leads to more sustainable well-being, that leads to more intelligent love for self and others. Within the paradigm of our cult, and the cult of Lazaris and the cult of America, it is puzzling that there's 320 million Americans or whatever it is. There's 1.4 billion Chinese. Chinese is, a culture on the rise. Why did Lazaris choose a white male American to hold the highest resonance of the planet rather than a Chinese woman in Mandarin or translate into multiple languages or whatever? That's the thing you explore in a dialogue instead of a monologue. So, we emulate our teachers, and this is a monologue, not a dialogue. And I would say that most Lazaris friends are very good at putting forth their opinion, copying Lazaris, more than a dialogue. I don't think I could have a good dialogue with anyone that's a Lazaris friend that I know of. It doesn't get usually beyond, well, you should listen to this tape and this tape and this tape and this tape. And thank goodness they have so many tapes to recommend as a way of not dealing with the issues in their own life and in my life. But, where it comes together is in the competency to dialogue, to hold all of this and see what could be learned from. I mean, is it possible that concept synergy could shift a pattern and leave happy clients for the rest of its existence? Is it possible that customer service at Concept Synergy could improve 250%? It's not, it's very easy with a competent CEO because, as I say, I get treated very well at Safeway, and moderately well at Whole Foods, certainly above, Concept Synergy standards. But could the Lazaris material lead to that? And I don't think it can. I think it's things like Brian Tracy and In Search of Excellence and, Tim Ferriss and I think those types of things do much better than Lazaris. And so I encourage people with businesses to learn from the people who are doing the best work as opposed to learning from Concept Synergy, because that there is a long, dissatisfied, grumbling mass. I don't know if it's better or worse than the average U.S. company, because I did a survey myself and 23% of my clients said they wouldn't recommend me. And I got their job done on time. I got it done on budget. And I did exactly what I said I would, and I responded to everything daily. So that still doesn't. But, it'd be interesting to see, where Concept Synergy ranks in terms of employee satisfaction and things like that. Because, I do think it's fun to gather and share useful data like that, particularly when you're so ungrounded and off in the esoterics, you know. The world of Lemuria. Yeah, but you didn't finish your crystal write-ups, Jack. You know, could we perhaps deal with, you know, doing what you say or giving a refund? You know, these are practical things, and whether Atlantis had 3 civilizations or 1 civilization isn't going to have bearing on whether you decide to have a retirement fund for Concept Synergy employees or not. You know, Jack has shown great immunity to listening to the whispers as the closest person to Lazaris in 40 years. So could one have hope for the rest of us, right? You know, if we're far enough away from Lazaris, might the techniques work? I don't know. But I think there is stuff in this polarity that is worth understanding and exploring, and I think it would be beneficial for Lazaris and Concept Synergy to deal with it directly. I would certainly enjoy a moderated conversation to explore this, and I would really welcome data. You know, every person I know who has worked at Concept Synergy has horror stories and is in an NDA dynamic. That's not a good statistic. Is that 100%, or are there a few that I just haven't met? That's not good data. And I think responding to that data with more love, the love enough to care and caring enough to see, seeing enough to understand it, understanding it enough to empathize. Because these things can be repaired. Apologies can be given. Contracts can be rewritten. Help can be asked for. I think it would be wonderful to see Jack asking for help. Say, look, I'm only Lazaris's channel. I was an insurance person before I got this monopoly thing. This is my first company I've run. I need help. I don't like the outcome, but I'm not quite sure how it's arriving. Obviously, being Lazaris's channel is not resulting in all my friends and employees being happy. Anyone got any ideas? I think Lazaris asking for help, Jack asking for help, that's be indicative. And if that doesn't work, if Jack asks for help and things get worse, you know, I think it'd be good to bring some of this to Lazaris. Like, Lazaris, what do you make of this? Because I don't think anyone starting out in the 70s would be predicting a lot of the things in this recording. I didn't. And so that's a gap in expectation. Now, Lazaris says you need to expect more. We did. But here's where it's coming in. The problem is not that we didn't expect. I expect a lot more from Jack and Concept Synergy. It's just not occurring. So Lazaris says, don't lower your expectations. I have. I've lowered my expectations. I expect Concept Synergy to be a mediocre, controlling, underpaid company indefinitely until a very large force wakes it up. Will this be a positive force? I don't think so, because my YouTube video that happened before they wrote the abuse contract, I think they're descending into paranoia and fear, which is what Terry mentioned they did when the first Lazaris critique website. So they responded to that with paranoia and fear of that website. Why? If you really believe, I mean, if there's data that supports any of this, you have nothing, bring the data out. But if they've been bombarded with data about all kinds of mess-ups for 30, 40 years, and they don't think the data supports Lazaris being as great as, you know, that he's stating he is, then they're probably going to descend into paranoia and control. It's what, you know, it's what they're doing at what's his name? Anyway, the Scientology group, they're going deeper and deeper into all kinds of machinations because of, it's not pretty seeing behind the scenes some of the stuff that's going on. It doesn't line up to eternal love and excellence and all of that. But I think it's important to see what's going on and also just acknowledge I am by no, I and you are in no way superior to concept synergy, to Terry, whatever. I mean, there have been plenty of non-Lazaris people that employees in the country that end up being martyred by their employers, and there are plenty of employers that are sociopathic all around, our culture. This is not a specific Lazaris phenomena. Rather, it's pretty stark talking about spiritual family and love and all of that, and not even paying medical benefits, and that's a pretty big. What I would say is that Lazaris's hyperbole and words have 10x'd the norm, but the norm, what's actually happening at concept synergy, seems to be about average. It may be a little below average. It may be well below average in some areas, a little better than average in other areas. It strikes me just as a chronically poorly managed company for 40 years, which in a monopoly framework, Lazaris is perpetuating by creating that monopoly, because most poorly run companies would learn or go out of business, and 9 out of 10 companies fail. But concept synergy is propped up by the monopoly of Lazaris's presence, which is a mixed bag for the staff who have to juggle the tapes and the presenting and people's excited stuff. How miserable. I mean, I realize one of the reasons concept synergy may be so short with their clients is, if you're an attorney or whatever and you use this and you win a $200,000 lawsuit, and concept synergy staff are making $30,000 a year and haven't gotten a raise in years, and this is not fun to hear, because Jack doesn't want to give you a raise, right? So these are basic psychological dynamics that anyone could predict if they knew they were going on. But nobody can tell, and nobody asks. It's a don't ask, don't tell, cult dynamic, which is not invented by concept synergy. It's rampant throughout our cult.